Welcome back to Marathon Man, where I go through Doctor Who from the beginning, and you join me at Doctor Who's first celebrity historical, first excursion into recorded history, and first missing chunk. Like with a lot of the missing stories, my first experience with Marco Polo was on a marathon, and I have to admit that first time, the temptation to just watch that truncated 30-minute reconstruction on the beginning DVD box set was almost enough to tempt me, but I couldn't do it because the guilt got the better of me. I'll quite happily put the laundry off for a couple of days because I don't feel like doing it, and let's face it, who would know? But no, I have to do all 7 missing episodes of Marco Polo for fear of repercussions. It's a strange mind of a Doctor Who fan, I guess. And truth be told, it wasn't a chore in the least to do that. In fact, actually, I look forward to getting to this story now because the loose cannon reconstruction, the work on it is so good. The reconstruction from 2013 is my preferred one, but the story itself is so good that it shines through anyway, that it's not exactly like putting myself through an ordeal. Even existing as it does as only still images and audio, Marco Polo is still extremely charming, which takes some doing given some of the subject matter that it touches upon. And as it is an excursion into recorded history, it has a surer footing than the caveman episodes of An Unearthly Child had. And as a result of that, for me, it comes out on top of that previous story. It has real things to teach its young audience about, for one thing, above and beyond vague lessons about prehistoric man's discovery of fire. Ping Cho's arranged marriage is one of these things, and when it showed up here I wondered if it would be something the show might shy away from nowadays, which isn't to suggest that Doctor Who has lost any of its bite or its vigour, and it's not to suggest that you can't say anything anymore these days, because you can. I just wonder if it's the sort of thing that the fun, breezy science fiction show of 2023 might choose not to depict if it isn't necessarily germane to the story it wants to tell. Regardless, and we can only speculate on if it would make it into Doctor Who of today, I think it's to its credit that it doesn't shy away from it here. A 15-year-old engaged to marry a 75-year-old is horrific, and its inclusion here carves Doctor Who out as something that's not likely to shy away from history's nasty and gruesome elements. Its cast of characters also helps to elevate this story. Marco Polo is the man who prevents the Doctor and his companions from leaving, but his motivations for doing so are, on the whole, pretty understandable. He isn't portrayed as the villain as such, because that goes to Tegana. There is a brilliant moment between the two of them when Tegana expresses his desire to kill the 4 travellers and Marco replies with, "Because their clothes are different from ours?" I mentioned earlier in the marathon, but because of Doctor Who's age we watch a lot of it in the past tense, but it has real power when something like this crops up in it, because it makes it feel present. Tegana's way of thinking 750-ish years ago, people still think like that now. And so while it is unfortunate, it does make this almost 60-year-old missing TV serial feel quite current. And Tegana's the best villain of the show so far. Yeah, okay, so the Daleks endured as monsters, but as an actual adversary, it's Tegana that rises to the top for me. And with a great villain, the best is brought out of Ian, Barbara, Susan and the Doctor. When Tegana sneers, "You're a magician, aren't you?" to the Doctor just responds by laughing. It's one of many, many instances in this story where I really, really wish that I could be watching it as it was broadcast. This is the Doctor we know, and through Hartnell's very cleverly judged performance, we're slowly starting to meet him. Occasionally finding those who pose him a threat very silly indeed feels so distinctly Doctor-like that it's really hard not to Leo DiCaprio meme the screen when moments like this show up in the early episodes of the Doctor as we know and love them starting to shine through. Early episodes, by the way, which are more densely layered, scripted, plotted and characterised than received wisdom about television from this period might have you believe. It's incredibly easy to be dismissive of Doctor Who from this era with modern sensibilities and having been raised on a different pace of storytelling, which is a shame because there is treasure in Doctor Who's past, and Marco Polo is a shining example. When Susan is telling Ping Cho about her home, it's not just a tender moment between the two girls forming a believable bond between one of the regular and one of the guest cast, particularly as Ping Cho's feeling trapped by having to marry a man 60 years her senior. No, it's also a really clever way of using the jarring presence of the regular cast to enrich the characterisation of the guest cast and make them feel more real for the time we spend with them. Hearing about where Susan is from and about how much more free it sounds, it's not just a tantalising glimpse into the backstory of the Doctor and Susan, it also really makes Ping Cho's misery feel more pronounced. So Marco Polo has confiscated the TARDIS key so that our regulars cannot get away in it, and at one point Susan promises Ping Cho that nobody will put her in the difficult situation of asking her to betray Marco and steal the TARDIS key for them. That is, in my opinion, Susan's best moment in the whole series so far. It shows a kindness, a maturity and a wisdom that unfortunately gets a little bit lost amongst all the screaming and the ankle spraining, which, while that's not as much as her reputation would have you believe, it's there enough to have overwhelmed the perception of her character. But there are moments, as in Marco Polo, where she is far more than that. Of course Ping Cho steals the TARDIS key anyway and gets a magnificent line when Susan warns her that Marco will be furious. But one of us will be on our way home. The script and the performances are so rich that it manages to somehow transcend not existing visually anymore. There is no denying that, even though I could legitimately say that I have never ever actually seen Marco Polo, out of all of the 4 stories so far, it is, if you couldn't tell, easily my favourite. While I have never disliked, nor will I ever dislike that opening trilogy, they all lack certain moments or writing, like the examples that I've listed here, and that's only some of them. For me, Marco Polo has a warmth and a depth to such an extent that this is where I pinpoint the programme becoming more confident in its appeal, its abilities, and its own unique set of parameters. Maybe at 7 episodes, again, it's slightly too long, but I strongly feel like it does more with its 7 episodes than the Dalek did with its 7. This is another very good reason not to cave and watch the truncated recon on the DVD box set. Towards the end of the story, the Doctor further grows into his character. He refuses to kowtow upon the arrival of the Khan, which is so wonderfully defiant, so like the Doctor. That it then transpires that his concern for his knees is so wonderfully irreverent, so like the Doctor. It makes for a brilliant scene, especially when both men hobble out together. His playing for the TARDIS key against Kubla Khan is a really tense subplot, and it's another one of those sequences where I wish I could actually see it happening, much like the climactic sword fight between Tegana and Marco. As this is the first missing story on the marathon, I'd like to talk about the missing episodes briefly. Because many are missing, many stories are missing, each story still has a certain reputation, and that reputation can change depending on any recoveries that might be made, for better or for worse. So for example, I found the Enemy of the World went up in my estimations when that was recovered, but I found that the Web of Fear went down slightly because the recovered episodes for that didn't quite live up to what I thought they were going to be based off of episode 1. Because I have these sumptuous visuals in my head when I envisage Marco Polo based off of the gorgeous looking photographs from production. But what if that isn't the case? What if it came back and I found out that it was directed heartbreakingly flatly? What if that sword fight that I mentioned was a massive anticlimax? Not that I think that's necessarily likely. First of all, it's directed by Waris Hussein, who did a great job with the first story. And also, if you believe the rumours, apparently Disney was sniffing around for the film rights to this story in the 1960s, and they probably wouldn't have done that had they not been impressed by what they saw. Regardless of how good it was in its complete form of broadcast, and I will never know unless it comes back. The images that I have in my head, every time I've consumed this story, I've read the novelisation, when I watch the recons, in my head this is some of the very best that Doctor Who could be. Incidentally, if anybody is watching this who was around in 1964 and watched Marco Polo go out on original broadcast, or in other countries a little bit later where it was sold to, I'd be really interested to know if your memories of it are as favourable as the pictures I've got in my head from watching these reconstructions. 20 episodes in, and Doctor Who continues to impress by showing what it's capable of at the same time as fleshing out the 4 lead characters. A truly excellent story. In a story of many fantastic moments, Ian's inability to murder the bandit Kwiju, I think it's Kwiju, Ian's inability to murder him, despite threatening to and then having his bluff called, is just another one of those long list of reasons why Ian is the hero we love to root for. It might be a bit of a cheat, but I'm going to go for the fact that in their correct form, none of the episodes exist. Big, huge thanks to the fans that recorded the audio back in the 60s, Loose Cannon for creating some really great reconstructions, maybe to the BBC for animating those at some point, maybe also to Intrepid Collectors for one day bringing it back to us. But I think the fact that I can never actually truly see Marco Polo properly is a low light, and I'm sorry if that's a cheat. It won't surprise you, out of 5. Easily the best story so far. As ever, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed my journey to Cathay, you know how YouTube works, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps me and the channel hugely. And let me know your thoughts on Marco Polo. Were you around and able to watch it when it went out in 1964? And if so, what are your memories of it? Did you find it as glorious as I do, or did it leave you a little bit cold and have you yearning for more sci-fi spacey action? Or did you come to it, like me, after it had been wiped? And do you find the lack of moving images hard to connect with? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you back here for another globe-trotting adventure, only a different globe and a very different way of trotting. So if you don't want to miss that, be sure to hit the subscribe button, clang that cloister bell, and I'll meet you at the Sea of Death. See you soon.